Hello, welcome back to 30 Days to Building a Marriage You Love. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Chris.
And we're at day 27, and we're excited today to be diving into the tip, always training. And who better to walk us through this tip than my handsome Army husband? Um, what comes to mind for you from a military standpoint when you think of the term training?
Well, the first thing is we're always training. At the end of the day, we're training the majority of our career in the military. And in 18 years, I've spent more time training than I've done anything else. And I've done a lot of deployments. So at the end of the day, when we are looking at our ability to fight America's wars, to defend the United States and the United States interests, if you will, we're always tracking it in the term of readiness. How ready are we to go to war at any given moment? How ready are we to go do those key training events? And so we track that by looking at our ability to execute a full range of military operations through a variety of training efforts, and our ability to defeat the enemy regardless of the threat that they pose. So that is kind of a function of how well we're manned, how well we're equipped with the right equipment, and then how trained we are, and then how solid is our equipment too, right? Is it maintained well? And then all that comes together to provide this picture to our senior leaders through a rating of how ready are we? How ready is every unit to go execute the mission that we've been called to do, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
It's just like hearing you talk about that just kind of gives me goosebumps, because this is exactly what we are called to as believers, as sons and daughters. And again, we talked about this in earlier videos, that the very first organization that God created was marriage, man and woman coming together. And it is the beautiful picture that God uses to describe his son and his bride, which is the church. And so it's really powerful, because as Chris talked about with an enemy and with training, and it's not, again, a question of if, but when. We were born into a war, and Ephesians 6 really unpackages this, that there is a war in the spiritual realms, and it's not against flesh and blood, but it's against principalities and dark forces. And there is just this turmoil that is raging around us that we can't see, but we are in the midst of it all the time.
Yep.
And so even with our marriages, it's not a question of if we're going to come into attack, if we're going to experience those valley seasons, it's when. And it's not to share this to say, oh, we're going to speak this, or but it is just the reality of it. And so it is to our best interest to train, to always be training in the physical, like how we talked about being proactive and going out on date nights, and maybe like that's doing a marriage course, like what you're doing now with us, or reading a book together. But then it's also in the spiritual, how we're talking about too, of having your daily encounters. That's got to be in place. Fasting, tithing, those essentials. And so we're always training in that. And in training is not a sense of being perfect, but it is putting in the efforts, just like what you would do with working out, of like, hey, did I work out today? Yes, I'm training my body for the outcome that I'm desiring and believing. I'm investing in that.
Yeah. So along the same lines, when you think about it in the military mindset, there are a variety of threats in the world that we are training and prepared to take on if that threat arises, right? It is a matter of when, not if. And so that being the case, you aim your training plan, you shape your training plan against those specific enemies, depending on who's aligned to really go next. And so there's a whole way that I can go much more detail, but I won't in this situation. But along the same line, there are a variety of potholes and minefields that we navigate as a married couple that we've got to know they're going to be out there.
Yeah.
We know society is attacking marriage. Society is attacking God's design for marriage every day. And every day it continues to degrade.
Society is being used by the enemy to attack.
Even better. Yes. Like the way you said that. And so knowing that, we have to put up a strong defense to make sure that we
Mhm.
are ready when those attacks come. So, in the rare event that Danielle and I have intense fellowship, we don't argue much, but every now and then there may be some times that Danielle's not right. And when when that happens, and we don't get along for something, we know that if it's gone on a little longer than a few moments, that we have to take a step back, and we know that then our battle is not against each other.
Yeah.
We are on the same team every day, and our battle is not against flesh and blood. It is against the powers and principalities of this dark world. So we know that the enemy is going to try to cause us to bicker, try to cause us to attack each other, try to cause us to not fight fair,
Partner with the spirit of offense.
try to cause us to be offended very easily. And so if we're training to make sure that we're ready when those attacks come, they're not going to have the same effect that the enemy would hope.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say when you do enter into a war strategy or a war experience? Maybe would you say that it is true that your goal is to diffuse the enemy or the tactics of the enemy as quickly and efficiently as possible to mitigate impact?
Yes. I mean, I think that's a
Or
good way to
minimize?
put it. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, our goal is to kill the enemy, right? And in order to effectively kill the enemy, you have to attack the strategies that you have trained and prepared for. So
Yes, but minimizing the impact to you and your soldiers.
yeah, that too. I mean, but that's kind of the next phase of it, right? That's the defense of it. That's understanding the strategy of how he may respond in any given scenario. And then it's a chess game from there as far as how you respond to whatever that attack is. And so the more you know about your enemy, the more effective you are at defeating them. And so the more you know about history, how he's fought before, the more you know about how previous conflicts have resulted in historical wars, the more you can kind of have an idea on what they might do in the next war.
Yeah. And really, like, our history, like, I mean, there's great value in diving into history, even of America, or, like how just all of that stuff, the world even, but like history even begins in the Bible, of going back to the playbook, or as Chris even called it earlier, like essentially our manual for marriage, of what was God's heart, his intent, his purpose for marriage from the beginning. Because a lot of times that war happens right here because we have it wrong, or we've labeled the enemy incorrectly, or we've come to the battlefield with like our own flesh of, I'm going to fight in my own flesh. And that's not, like, there is something supernatural when we place God at the center of our marriage. And so if our battle is not against flesh and blood, but is against these dark spiritual principalities that we can't see, we can't touch, we don't have authority over unless through Jesus, then we are stepping onto the battlefield every day in a mindset and in a posture of failure. So we've got to reposition, go back to the manual, as Chris said, and we've got to approach each day, each season with great intentionality and great purpose to always be training.
Yeah. So the manual analogy Danielle was referring to is, I think pretty much everyone that is watching this video, if you have kids, you know what it's like on Christmas Eve putting together something. It's usually not a very quick process. There is a long manual and a long list of instructions on how you're going to put something together. And the one that comes to mind for me is a small kitchen we built for Emmaus that probably had 600 pieces. And I thought it was going to take about an hour and a half, 2 hours. It would take 4 hours. And we followed the instructions very specifically. And
we almost needed some counseling after.
Yeah, I think we watched 2.5 movies, Christmas movies that night while we were putting it together.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if we would have tried to put together that kitchen without the instruction manual, it probably wouldn't have turned out the way that we wanted it to.
It would have gone in the trash.
It would. Well, I mean, let's not go that far. We would have got there eventually. And usually someone that, like myself, that doesn't like to use instruction notes, or even more like you, don't like to read instructions ever. Often.
There's a different video.
Okay. Yeah,
that's a different video.
We'll save that for later.
Maybe to 28.
Yeah, but if we didn't follow the
This
instruction
is
manual.
video 28. Guys, I'm so sorry. This is video 28. We may edit that at the beginning, but this is video 28.
Are you done?
Yes, sorry.
When you come to the manual, you have to follow it to finish and get the desired result. The same thing applies to your marriage, right? In our marriage, if we're going along and we're losing sight of where we should be,
Mhm.
always go back to the playbook, always go back to the Bible and read God's heart for marriage. He designed marriage, he created marriage. So his design is perfect for marriage. So if you ever lose sight of that, whenever we lose sight of it or kind of drift off course, we always come back to the word. We always come back to where we're rooted and where we're grounded and how God has designed our marriage to be.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining us for tip number 28. So sorry about that. Always be training. As always, we would love to hear from you. If there is something that really spoke to you in this tip, or maybe as you're applying it and you're navigating it, let us know. We would love to cheer you on and pray with you, pray for you. And we just want to encourage you, keep fighting for your marriage. You're doing a great job.